Experimental research, a scientific approach where independent variables are manipulated to measure their effect on dependent variables. Widely used in physical sciences, social sciences, psychology, and education to establish cause and effect relationships. What defines experimental research? Manipulation, when researchers actively control and change independent variables to observe effects. Measurement, effects on dependent variables are observed and recorded over time. And quantitative type of research involves collecting numerical data and performing statistical analysis. There are three types of experimental design. The first type is pre-experimental, is the simplest form with no control group, includes one-shot case studies and pre-test, post-test designs. The second type is quasi-experimental type of research. The word quasi means partial, half, or pseudo. Therefore, the quasi-experimental research bearing a resemblance to the true experimental research but not the same. In quasi-experiments, the participants are not randomly assigned, and as such, they are used in settings where randomization is difficult or impossible. This is very common in educational research. The true experimental research design relies on statistical analysis to approve or disprove a hypothesis. It is the most accurate type of experimental design and may be carried out with or without a pretest on at least two randomly assigned dependent subjects. The true experimental research design must contain a control group, a variable that can be manipulated by the researcher, and the distribution must be random. The classification of true experimental design include the post-test only control group design, pre-test post-test control group design, and Solomon four-group design. The post-test only control group design. In this design, subjects are randomly selected and assigned to the two groups, control and experimental, and only the experimental group is treated. After close observations, both groups are post-tested and a conclusion is drawn from the difference between these groups. The pre-test, post-test control group design. For this control group design, subjects are randomly assigned to the two groups. Both are presented, but only the experimental group is treated. After close observation, both groups are post-tested to measure the degree of change in each group. Solomon four-group design. This is the combination of the pre-test only and the pre-test post-test control groups. In this case, the randomly selected subjects are placed into four groups. The first two of these groups are tested using the post-test only method, while the other two are tested using the pre-test post-test method. Some uses of experimental research design are highlighted below. In medicine, experimental research is used to provide the proper treatment for diseases. In most cases, rather than directly using patients as the research subject, researchers take a sample of the bacteria from the patient's body and are treated with the developed antibacterial. The changes observed during this period are recorded and evaluated to determine its effectiveness. This process can be carried out using different experimental research methods. In education, aside from science subjects like chemistry and physics, which involves teaching students how to perform experimental research, it can also be used in improving the standard of an academic institution. This includes testing students' knowledge on different topics, coming up with better teaching methods, and the implementation of other groups that will aid student learning. During the product development phase, one of the major aims of the product team is to create a great user experience with the product. Therefore, before launching the final product design, potential are brought in to interact with the product. For example, when finding it difficult to choose how to position a button or feature on the app interface, a random sample of product testers are allowed to test the two samples and how the button positioning influences the user interaction is recorded. The following are the key characteristics of the experimental research. They are variables such as dependent variables, independent variables, and extraneous variables. Setting conducted in laboratory for controlled conditions or field settings for real-world applicability. And multivariable can include multiple independent variables like time, skills, and test scores simultaneously. Data collection methods in experimental research are the different ways in which data can be collected for experimental research. They are used in different cases depending on the type of research being carried out. The first is observational study. This type of study is carried out over a long period. It measures and observes the variables of interest without changing existing conditions. The second type of data collection is simulations. This procedure uses mathematical, physical, or computer models to replicate a real-life process or situation. It is frequently used when the actual situation is too expensive, dangerous to replicate in real life. A survey is a tool used to gather relevant data about the characteristics of a population and is one of the most common data collection tools. A survey consists of a group of questions prepared by the researcher to be answered by the research subject. What are the disadvantages of experimental research? It is highly prone to human error due to its dependency on variable control, which may not be properly implemented. These errors could eliminate the validity of the experiment and the research being conducted. The second disadvantage is that it is a time-consuming process. So much time is spent on testing dependent variables and waiting for the effect of the manipulation of dependent variables to manifest. It is also expensive. The third disadvantage is unrealistic condition when controlling extraneous variables may create artificial situations leading to inaccurate conclusions. Ethical and measurement challenges may lead to medical research risks, response bias, and difficulty measuring human responses complicate implementation. What are the differences between experimental and non-experimental research? In experimental research, the researcher can control and manipulate the environment of the research, including the predictor variable which can be changed. On the other hand, non-experimental research cannot be controlled or manipulated by the researcher at will. This is because it takes place in a real-life setting where extraneous variables cannot be eliminated. Therefore, it is more difficult to conclude non-experimental studies, even though they are much more flexible and allow for a greater range of study fields. The relationship between cause and effect cannot be established in non-experimental research, while it can be established in experimental research. This may be because many extraneous variables also influence the changes in the research subject, making it difficult to point at a particular variable as the cause of a particular change. Independent variables are not introduced, withdrawn, or manipulated in non-experimental designs, but the same may not be said about experimental research. Experimental research designs are often considered to be the standard in research designs. This is partly due to the common misconception that research is equivalent to scientific experiments, a component of experimental research design. Experimental research is suitable for research whose goal is to examine cause-effect relationships. For example, explanatory research. It can be conducted in the laboratory or field settings, depending on the aim of the research that is being carried out.